Remain silent, or you will leave this house before midnight. The Dowager Duchess delivered the threat without raising her voice. Her fingers rested lightly against the stem of a crystal glass, as though she were discussing the arrangement of flowers rather than the expulsion of her son's lawful wife. Eleanor Blackthorne stood behind the chair that had once belonged to her. Tonight, another woman occupied it. Lady Beatrice Vale wore a gown of deep green silk and the emerald necklace traditionally reserved for the Duchess of Blackthorne during formal estate dinners. The jewels did not belong to Eleanor, but the place at the Duke's right hand did. So did the authority Beatrice had been exercising since that morning. Eleanor looked toward her husband. The Duke of Blackthorne was speaking quietly with Mr. Harcourt, the most powerful of the estate's creditors. He did not meet her eyes. Earlier that day, he had signed a temporary transfer of authority, giving his cousin, Lord Julian Vale, control of the Blackthorne accounts. Those were the same accounts Eleanor had kept solvent through 2 failed harvests. She had begged her husband to wait until the tenant receipts could be examined. He had refused. "You have had 3 years to repair these finances," Nathaniel had told her. "I will not risk my family's name because you cannot admit that you have failed." Eleanor had not failed. She had negotiated longer repayment periods, reduced waste in the household, and used part of her marriage settlement to purchase seed when the estate granaries ran low. But none of that mattered after Julian presented a ledger showing thousands of pounds missing. Nathaniel had not asked why the handwriting changed halfway through the book. He had not compared the numbers with the receipts Eleanor kept in the locked estate room. He had simply signed, because he trusted a gentleman born into his family more than the merchant's daughter he had married. A servant approached Eleanor and murmured that her personal belongings had been moved from the Duchess's apartments to a guest chamber in the West Wing. Her writing desk had been locked, and its key had been surrendered to Lord Julian. Eleanor felt the humiliation like a hand closing around her throat. Inside that desk were letters from tenant widows, planting records, and copies of every agreement she had negotiated. Without them, she could not defend herself. More importantly, she could not protect the families whose winter grain had been pledged as security for Blackthorne's debts. "Take your place at the far end," the Dowager Duchess instructed. "You are permitted to observe. You are not permitted to advise." Eleanor moved to the final empty chair. Her former governess, Mrs. Agnes Finch, stood among the senior servants near the wall. Their eyes met for only a moment. Agnes gave the smallest shake of her head. Something else had happened. Before Eleanor could question her, the dining room doors opened. 2 solicitors entered carrying leather cases, followed by 3 creditors and Lord Julian Vale. Julian crossed the room with the relaxed confidence of a man who already believed himself victorious. The Duke took his seat. "Let us finish this," Nathaniel said. Mr. Harcourt removed a folded document from his case. "Your Grace, we have discovered an obligation not previously disclosed in the Blackthorne accounts." He placed the paper on the table. "This contract pledges the winter grain stored at North Mill, Eastmere, and Calder Farm as security against private debts incurred by Her Grace." A stunned silence followed. Eleanor rose so abruptly that her chair scraped across the floor. "That is impossible." The Dowager Duchess struck the table with her palm. "You were ordered to remain silent. If those stores are removed, more than 80 families will have nothing before the spring harvest. Then perhaps you should have considered them before gambling with their food," Julian said. Eleanor turned toward him. "I have never borrowed against the grain." Mr. Harcourt pointed to the bottom of the document. "The contract bears your name and signature." Nathaniel looked down at the page. Pain flickered across his face, but suspicion hardened it almost immediately. "Is that your hand?" "An imitation of it. Every accusation against you has received the same answer, because every accusation came from the same altered accounts." Julian leaned toward the Duke. "She is trying to delay the seizure. If the creditors are not given authority tonight, the London Consortium will petition the court at sunrise." That was the deadline, Eleanor realized. Not next week. Not after a proper inquiry. Sunrise. Someone needed Nathaniel to surrender the grain before the original receipts could be recovered. The Dowager Duchess looked toward the footman. "Escort her from the room." "No." Nathaniel's command stopped them. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at his wife. His expression offered no apology, only the grim determination of a man who still believed judgment belonged to him. "They have demanded your silence," he said. "I am asking you to speak first." Eleanor approached the table. The contract lay between the candles, surrounded by untouched silver and crystal. Nathaniel pushed it toward her. "You have one opportunity," he said. "Explain why your signature appears on that paper." She studied the wording, the amount, and the names of the farms. The clauses had been copied from agreements she had drafted years earlier for her father's shipping business. Whoever created the contract had access to her private records. Then she noticed the paper itself. Eleanor lifted her water glass and held the document behind it, using the candle flame to illuminate the fibers. A faint crest appeared beneath the forged signature, 3 reeds enclosed by a narrow circle. Her heart struck hard against her ribs. She knew that watermark. Her father had purchased paper from the 3 Reeds mill until the building burned to the ground 7 years earlier. Not a single sheet had been produced since then, yet the contract was dated only 8 months ago. "This paper is older than the debt written upon it," Eleanor said. Julian's smile vanished. Nathaniel leaned forward. "Can you prove that?" "Yes, but the proof is inside the writing desk you allowed Lord Julian to seize this morning." At the edge of the room, Mrs. Finch dropped a silver tray. The crash drew every eye toward her. She was staring at Julian's coat. A torn corner of pale paper protruded from his inner pocket, marked with the same 3-reed watermark. Julian immediately covered it with his hand. Eleanor understood then that the false contract was not merely intended to disgrace her. Her husband's signature had already transferred the accounts, the keys, and the authority required to surrender the grain. By silencing her, Nathaniel had placed the entire estate inside the hands of the man who had forged her name. And before midnight, Julian intended to make the theft irreversible. Julian removed the pale corner from his pocket before anyone else could reach him. "A receipt," he said, holding it between 2 fingers. "Nothing more. Then place it beside the contract," Eleanor replied. His eyes narrowed. "You are hardly in a position to issue commands." "No. But His Grace is." Every face turned toward Nathaniel. For one suspended moment, Eleanor wondered whether he would choose pride again. If he protected Julian now, he would confirm that the truth mattered less to him than avoiding public embarrassment. Nathaniel extended his hand. "Give it to me." Julian hesitated, then surrendered the paper. It was not a receipt. It was the torn upper corner of a letter, and the 3-reed watermark appeared clearly when Nathaniel raised it toward the candle. Only 4 words remained visible beneath the jagged edge. "Before the bells strike." "Where is the rest?" Nathaniel asked. "I found that fragment among the papers seized from Eleanor's desk. You told me her desk had not yet been examined." Julian recovered quickly. "I meant it had not been examined thoroughly." Eleanor looked at Mrs. Finch. The fallen tray still lay at the older woman's feet, but Agnes was no longer watching Julian. She was staring at the dining room clock. 20 minutes remained before midnight. Mr. Harcourt gathered the contract. Whatever the origin of this paper, the signature must still be considered valid until disproved. "My instructions are to secure the winter grain tonight." "You cannot remove 3 granaries in 20 minutes, Eleanor said. "We need only take possession of the keys." Lord Julian smiled again. "And I now hold them." The meaning of the evening became clear. The creditors had not come to debate the estate's accounts. They had come to obtain the granary keys under the appearance of lawful consent. Once the stores passed into their custody, the grain could be sold, transported, or used to force Nathaniel into surrendering more valuable land. Eleanor had spent 3 years preventing exactly that outcome. When she first arrived at Blackthorne, the estate appeared prosperous from the windows of a carriage. The house was magnificent, the stables full, and the servants dressed in immaculate livery. But the accounts revealed a different truth. The late Duke had borrowed heavily against future harvests, and Nathaniel had inherited obligations hidden behind generations of ceremony. Eleanor recognized the pattern because she had been raised above her father's counting rooms in Bristol. Before other girls learned court dances, she had learned to compare cargo manifests with warehouse records. Her father taught her that fraud rarely began with a dramatic theft. It began with a small number that appeared too ordinary to question. At Blackthorne, she had discovered dozens of them. A cart charged twice. Seed purchased, but never delivered. Repairs paid for on cottages whose roofs still leaked. During her first year, she saved the estate more than £2,000. During the second, she persuaded creditors to suspend interest after floods destroyed the western fields. Last winter, she sold 2 pieces of her mother's jewelry, so the tenants would not lose their seed grain. Nathaniel knew some of this. He had once praised her intelligence in private, but whenever his mother called her methods undignified, he asked Eleanor to work quietly. Whenever Julian mocked her merchant upbringing, Nathaniel advised her not to provoke him. Little by little, the Duke had accepted the benefit of her knowledge, while denying her the authority that should have accompanied it. Now another man possessed both. "Return the granary keys," Eleanor told Julian. The Dowager Duchess gave a cold laugh. "You continue to behave as if this house belongs to you. I am behaving as if 80 families should not starve, because Lord Julian wishes to satisfy a questionable contract. The families are not your concern any longer. They became my concern when I learned their names." That was the first boundary Eleanor had spoken aloud before the entire family. The Duchess's expression sharpened, but Eleanor did not lower her gaze. Nathaniel rose from his chair. "The keys will remain here until the paper is examined." Mr. Harcourt stiffened. "Your Grace, delaying possession may be treated as refusal to honor the agreement. Then record that I delayed it for 1 hour. 1 hour will change nothing," Julian said. "It may reveal where the rest of that letter is." Julian's jaw tightened. "And if it does not?" Nathaniel looked at Eleanor. "Then the creditors take the keys, and my wife leaves Blackthorne before dawn." The words should not have wounded her after everything he had already done, yet they did. Even now, his willingness to hear her was conditional. 1 hour of attention weighed against 3 years of service. Eleanor folded the contract carefully. "I need access to my writing desk, the estate correspondence, and the paper samples my father left me. You may inspect them under supervision," Nathaniel said. "No." The room went still. Eleanor faced him across the table. "Lord Julian accused me, searched my rooms, and now controls the evidence. He will not supervise my defense. Mrs. Finch will accompany me, and Mr. Harcourt may send one of his clerks as an independent witness." Nathaniel's expression darkened at being challenged before his guests, but he could not object without revealing how unfairly the evidence had been handled. "Agreed." Julian took 1 step toward the door. "I will retrieve the keys to her desk." "They were taken from me this morning," Eleanor said. "Where are they now?" "In my office." Mrs. Finch finally spoke. "No, my lord." Her voice trembled, but every person heard it. "I saw you give them to Lady Beatrice." Eleanor turned toward the woman, seated in her former place. Beatrice had gone pale. "That is absurd," she said. "Why would I want access to Eleanor's papers?" A faint smell reached Eleanor as Beatrice shifted in her chair. Smoke. Not candle smoke, but the bitter odor of scorched leather and burning ink. Eleanor looked toward the corridor leading to the west wing. A thin grey ribbon had begun to creep beneath the dining room door. Her writing desk was not being searched. It was being destroyed. Eleanor ran before Nathaniel could speak. She crossed the room, pulled open the door, and found a footman stumbling through the corridor with soot across his face. "Your Grace," he gasped. "The west apartments are on fire." Behind her, the dining room clock began to strike midnight. The first stroke of midnight was still echoing when Eleanor gathered her skirts and ran toward the west wing. Smoke rolled along the ceiling, blackening the carved plaster above her, while 2 servants dragged a carpet runner away from the flames. The fire had begun inside her former apartments, and its position was too precise to be accidental. It had not started near the hearth or the candles. It burned hottest around her writing desk. "Water from the laundry cistern," Eleanor ordered. "Do not open the windows. The draft will feed it." The servants obeyed before Nathaniel reached the corridor. For years, Eleanor had supervised emergency drills after discovering that the manor's old timber walls could carry fire from one wing to another. The Dowager Duchess had called the drills unnecessary. Now they were the only reason the flames had not reached the roof. Mrs. Finch arrived carrying a wet wool blanket. Together, she and Eleanor pushed through the smoke. One side of the desk was already burning, but its heavy oak frame had not yet collapsed. Eleanor threw the blanket over it and pressed down until the flames weakened. Heat scorched her palms through the fabric. Nathaniel caught her around the waist and pulled her back as a section of curtain fell where she had been standing. "Have you lost your senses?" he demanded. "My evidence is inside that desk. You could have been killed, and by sunrise, 80 families could be without food." She twisted free and pointed toward the open door, connecting her apartments to the smaller blue chamber. The fire began from that side. Lady Beatrice had been given the blue chamber when she arrived at Blackthorne 6 weeks earlier. Beatrice stopped at the end of the corridor, one hand pressed to her throat. "Are you accusing me of setting a fire while I was seated beside you?" "I am saying the person who entered my rooms came through yours." Julian stepped between them. "The servants used this corridor all evening. Any one of them could have done it. Then none of you should touch anything until the route has been examined," Eleanor said. Nathaniel looked at the blackened doorway, then ordered 2 footmen to guard both rooms. It was a small concession, but it was the first time, that evening, he had protected evidence rather than surrendering it to Julian. When the final flames were extinguished, the writing desk remained standing, though its leather top had curled and most of the loose papers had turned to ash. The lock was open. Eleanor knelt beside it, ignoring the sting in her hands. "The key was used before the fire," she said. "How can you know?" Nathaniel asked. She pointed to the brass plate. "There are no scratches around the keyhole. It was not forced." Mrs. Finch crouched beside her. The lower drawer may have survived. Eleanor tried the handle. It would not move. The wood had swollen from the water, so a servant brought a narrow iron tool and worked it into the seam. The drawer finally opened with a groan. Inside lay a scorched bundle, wrapped in oilcloth. Eleanor released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her father had taught her to protect important records from damp during sea voyages, and she had continued the habit at Blackthorne. The paper samples were safe, along with copies of the grain agreements and a list of every payment made by the tenants during the previous year. Mr. Harcourt compared the old 3 reeds paper with the contract. The watermarks were identical. "This proves the sheet was manufactured before the mill burned," he admitted. "But old paper can be used for a new contract." "Yes," Eleanor replied, "which means we must examine the ink and establish where the sheet came from." She searched the bundle again. Her father had left her 12 samples. Only 11 remained. In the space where the 12th should have been, she found a narrow green silk thread caught beneath the oilcloth. It matched Lady Beatrice's gown. Beatrice looked down at her sleeve and immediately folded her arms. "That proves nothing. I visited Eleanor's rooms last week." "You said you had never entered them," Mrs. Finch reminded her. "I said I had no reason to examine her papers." "Why did you visit?" Eleanor asked. "To return a book." "Which book?" Beatrice's eyes flicked toward Julian. The movement lasted less than a second, but Eleanor saw it. So did Nathaniel. "This is becoming ridiculous," Julian said. "The creditors are waiting, and the contract remains valid. A thread cannot overturn a signed obligation." "Perhaps not," Eleanor replied, "but the contract contains another error." She spread the document across a small table and placed the surviving tenant agreements beside it. The forged paper pledged grain from North Mill, Eastmere, and Calder Farm. Calder Farm has not stored grain for 18 months. Its granary floor collapsed during the spring floods and has never been repaired. Mr. Harcourt frowned. "Then why include it?" "Because whoever prepared this contract copied the farms from an older list. They knew my father's paper, my handwriting, and the wording of my agreements, but they did not know the present condition of the estate." Nathaniel slowly turned toward Julian. "You presented the storage list." Julian's face hardened. "A clerk prepared it." "Name him." "I will not have an innocent employee condemned because Eleanor has invented another distraction." "Then bring the original inventory," Eleanor said. "It should contain the clerk's name and the date of inspection." Julian did not answer. Outside the room, the creditors began speaking in agitated voices. Their legal claim depended on the existence of the grain. If part of the pledged security had never existed, the contract could be challenged before possession changed hands. Eleanor had won the hour Nathaniel had given her. Mr. Harcourt returned the granary keys to the table. "No seizure will occur tonight. My firm will suspend action until the inventory and contract are authenticated." Relief moved through Eleanor, but she did not mistake delay for safety. Julian still controlled the estate office. He still possessed the original ledgers, and someone had been willing to burn half the house to destroy her copies. Beatrice stepped close enough that only Eleanor could hear her. "You believe this has saved you?" Her smile remained perfect for the watching guests. "By tomorrow evening, every tenant will know their Duchess pledged their food to cover her debts." Eleanor held her gaze. "Then tomorrow evening, I will know who told them." Beatrice's smile disappeared. At that moment, a stable boy appeared at the far end of the corridor, breathless and frightened. He held a small wooden tally token, marked with the number of the North Mill granary. "Your Grace," he said to Eleanor, ignoring the Duke entirely. 6 wagons left the lower yard before the fire began. Lord Julian's men had the keys, and the wagons were heading north. Eleanor looked toward Julian. The seizure had not been scheduled for midnight. It had already begun before the creditors arrived. And now, Julian knew that she was the only person in Blackthorne capable of tracing where the stolen grain would go. Nathaniel seized the tally token from the stable boy. "Who authorized those wagons to leave?" The boy's face went white. He could not have been more than 15, and Julian's stare made him shrink inside his oversized livery coat. "Answer, His Grace," Julian said, "unless you intend to accuse your betters of theft." Eleanor stepped between them. "He will answer without threats." Nathaniel's attention shifted to her, but she kept her eyes on the boy. "What is your name?" "Thomas. Read." "Your Grace." "Tell us only what you saw, Thomas." The boy swallowed. 6 covered wagons entered through the lower gate after sunset. Mr. Pike gave the drivers the North Mill keys. He said Lord Julian had ordered the grain moved before the roads froze. Julian shook his head. "Pike is an assistant steward. He requires no permission from me to manage ordinary deliveries." "A movement of winter grain is not ordinary," Eleanor said. "And the North Mill tally should have remained in the estate office." Thomas looked toward her. "Mr. Pike dropped it near the stable doors. I kept it because I thought he would come back." Julian took a step forward. "You stole estate property." The accusation struck exactly where he intended. A servant could be dismissed or prosecuted for much less. Thomas began insisting that he had meant no harm, but Eleanor placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. The token remained on Blackthorne land, and he surrendered it voluntarily. No theft occurred. That is for the Duke to decide. Then His Grace should also decide why you are more interested in punishing a child than recovering 6 wagons of grain. Silence tightened the corridor. Nathaniel looked from Eleanor to Thomas, then gave the token back to the boy. "You did correctly. You will remain under Mrs. Finch's protection until I have heard your full account." Julian's expression revealed nothing, but Eleanor knew he would remember the humiliation. Thomas had become dangerous to him simply by seeing the wagons. She turned to Nathaniel. "If they took the North Road, they are not heading for London. The bridge at Fairwater cannot support 6 loaded wagons. They could use the eastern crossing," he said, "not without passing the toll house." Eleanor knelt beside the bundle rescued from her desk and found a folded map of the estate roads. One route led north from the lower yard, curved around the abandoned quarry, and divided near the village of Ashcombe. "They will turn here." Her finger stopped at a narrow road leading toward Bell's Wharf. "The canal remains open, and grain can be transferred to barges before morning. Once it reaches the river, we may never recover it." Nathaniel called for horses, but Julian objected immediately. "You cannot send armed men after wagons moving under lawful estate authority." "The authority was granted to you," Nathaniel said. "If the wagons are lawful, order them to return." Julian folded his hands behind his back. "I cannot recall men I did not dispatch." Eleanor studied him. He had prepared his denial carefully. If the wagons were caught, he would blame Pike. If they escaped, the grain would disappear before the contract could be challenged. "There is another way," she said. The canal company weighed every commercial load at Bell's Wharf. Eleanor's father had taught her how transport records were duplicated. One ticket travelled with the cargo, while a matching counterfoil remained in the weighmaster's book. Even if Julian's men used false names, the weight and time would establish what had passed through the wharf. Nathaniel ordered a carriage, but Eleanor was already moving toward the stairs. "You are not going," he said. "I am the only person here who knows the expected weight of the grain. Give me the figures. You dismissed my records as unreliable an hour ago." His face tightened. "This is neither the time nor the place to settle our grievances. No, it is the time to recover the food you allowed another man to control." Nathaniel flinched, but he did not deny it. 10 minutes later, Eleanor entered the carriage with Mrs. Finch and Thomas. Nathaniel mounted beside 4 estate riders. Julian insisted on accompanying them, claiming his presence would prevent an unlawful confrontation. Beatrice remained at the manor with the Dowager Duchess, but as the carriage departed, Eleanor saw her standing at an upstairs window. A small lantern glowed in her hand. She raised it once, lowered it, then raised it twice. A signal. Faster, Eleanor called to the driver. They reached Bell's Wharf shortly before 1 in the morning. 2 grain wagons stood abandoned beside the canal, their covers thrown open. The other 4 were positioned near a waiting barge. Men were already unloading the first sacks. Nathaniel ordered them to stop. "Mr." Pike emerged from behind the wagons, with a pistol in his hand. "We have written authority." "From whom?" Nathaniel demanded. Pike produced a folded order, bearing the Duke's seal. Eleanor recognized Nathaniel's signature at the bottom. "You signed another instruction," she said. His expression changed. "Julian told me it authorized an inventory of the granaries. It authorizes their contents to be transported wherever the acting estate manager considers necessary." Julian took the paper and pretended to study it. "The wording is broad, but entirely legal." Nathaniel stared at his cousin. He finally understood that his own signature had made the theft possible. Yet before he could revoke the order, one of the drivers cracked his whip. The lead wagon lurched toward the canal road, nearly striking Thomas. Eleanor pulled the boy aside and shouted to the weighmaster, "Close the iron gate." The elderly weighmaster recognized her from previous harvest inspections. He dropped the barrier across the road, trapping the wagons between the canal and Nathaniel's riders. Pike raised his pistol, but the Duke reached him first and knocked the weapon aside. The grain was recovered without a shot being fired. At dawn, the wagons returned to Blackthorne beneath the eyes of tenants gathering along the road. Julian rode ahead and reached the manor before them. By the time Eleanor arrived, he had already told the household that Nathaniel had discovered the theft and personally saved the winter stores. No one mentioned Eleanor's map, her knowledge of the canal records, or the command that had closed the gate. Worse, rumors had begun spreading that Eleanor herself had arranged the wagons so she could stage a heroic recovery after her fraudulent contract was exposed. The Dowager Duchess repeated the accusation before the servants. "My son corrected the disaster his wife created." Eleanor was exhausted, smoke-stained, and bleeding through the cloth wrapped around her burned palm. Still, she climbed the entrance steps and faced the household. "Then let us examine the weighmaster's counterfoil. It records who declared the cargo and who was intended to receive it." Julian's confidence faltered. The weighmaster handed Nathaniel the duplicate ticket. In the recipient's space appeared the name of a London grain broker. Eleanor knew it well. The broker had purchased land from Lord Julian only 3 months earlier. Nathaniel now possessed a direct contradiction he could verify without trusting his wife's word. Eleanor looked at him across the crowded hall. "Send a rider to the broker," she said. "Ask who promised him Blackthorne's grain." Nathaniel had been given another chance to investigate before causing greater harm. Julian quietly placed a sealed letter beside his hand. After reading the first line, the Duke's face became cold. He folded the letter and looked at Eleanor as though the night's evidence had vanished. "There will be no rider," he said. "My wife is to be confined to her rooms immediately." Eleanor did not move. What was written in that letter? Nathaniel folded it once more and slipped it inside his coat. "You will be told after the magistrate arrives." The word magistrate changed the room. Servants lowered their eyes. Thomas moved closer to Mrs. Finch, and even the Dowager Duchess appeared startled. Eleanor had expected another accusation, perhaps another attempt to remove her from the estate accounts. She had not expected her husband to summon the law. "Am I accused of a crime?" she asked. "A message arrived from London while we were at the wharf. The grain broker claims you offered him the Blackthorne stores 3 weeks ago. I have never met the man. He possesses letters bearing your signature." Julian stood behind the Duke, careful not to appear triumphant. "The broker also states that payment was to be deposited with the Ashford Commercial Bank." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Her father had helped establish that bank, and a small trust in her name remained there. It was the perfect destination for stolen money if someone wished to make her appear guilty. "Send for the bank records," she said, "and the original letters." The broker included copies. "Copies are not evidence of who wrote them. Neither is a burned desk," Nathaniel replied. Eleanor studied his face. He was exhausted, humiliated, and desperate to recover the certainty he had possessed before the wagons were found. Julian's accusation offered him an easier explanation than admitting he had given a thief control of Blackthorne. "You saw Julian's connection to the broker," she said. "You saw the old paper, the stolen key, and the wagons moved under authority you gave him. Are you truly prepared to ignore all of it, because another letter carries my name? I am prepared to prevent further losses while the truth is established. By imprisoning me, by limiting your access to the estate. The theft occurred after you removed my access. The words landed heavily. Nathaniel glanced toward the servants, embarrassed that they had heard her challenge him. Julian recognized the moment and stepped closer. Your Grace, the creditors will return this afternoon. If they learn that the person accused of fraud remains free to alter records or influence witnesses, they may petition for immediate control of the estate. Thomas is not a witness, she influenced, Mrs. Finch said. He came willingly. He is a frightened stable boy repeating whatever her Grace wishes him to say. Thomas clenched his fists, but Eleanor touched his arm before he could answer. Julian wanted the boy angry. An outburst would make him appear dishonest and disobedient. Mrs. Finch, Eleanor said quietly, take Thomas to the servants' hall. He is not to leave the manor, Julian ordered. You have no authority over him, Eleanor replied. His mother placed him in my care when he entered service. The Dowager Duchess scoffed. Again, you speak as if every tenant and servant belongs to you. They do not belong to anyone. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Eleanor knew she had crossed another line, not a moral line, but the invisible boundary protecting his authority from public contradiction. He drew the letter from his coat and handed it to her. The message was short. The broker claimed Eleanor had promised him 800 sacks of grain and had requested payment through an account identified only by 4 numbers. She recognized those numbers. They belonged not to her trust, but to a charitable fund she administered for tenant widows. If money had been deposited there, dozens of innocent women could be accused of benefiting from the fraud. I need the fund ledger, she said. No, Julian answered. You need it because whoever planned this intends to implicate every widow receiving assistance from that account. Nathaniel looked at the letter again. The account is under your supervision. Yes, that is why it was chosen. The entrance doors opened, and Sir Edmund Hale, the local magistrate, entered with 2 constables. Eleanor had known him for years. He had attended dinners at Blackthorne and once thanked her for helping his tenants after a fever outbreak. Now he could barely meet her eyes. Your Grace, he said to Nathaniel, I received your request for an inquiry, and I have reached a decision, Nathaniel replied. Eleanor felt the last possibility of reason closing between them. Do not act until the bank confirms who accessed that account. Nathaniel walked to the writing table in the hall. Julian placed 2 documents before him. The first was a formal accusation authorizing the magistrate to investigate Eleanor for fraud and attempted theft. The second transferred complete control of all private and estate correspondence to Lord Julian until the inquiry ended. If you sign that, Eleanor said, Julian will control the very records needed to prove what he has done, or needed to prove what you have done. Nathaniel picked up the pen. Look at me, she said. His hand stopped. For one moment, the grand hall and every watching face seemed to fall away. Eleanor saw the man who had once sat beside her in the estate office until dawn, listening as she explained how to save his tenants from eviction. She saw the husband who had once said her mind was the first honest thing he had found in aristocratic society. You know I would never steal their food, she said. His voice dropped. I no longer know what to believe. Then wait. Julian moved nearer. The creditors will be here within hours. Eleanor kept her gaze on Nathaniel. Choose the truth before your pride makes the choice for you. Nathaniel signed both documents. The scratch of the pen was almost inaudible. Yet Eleanor felt it, like a door being locked. Sir Edmund read the accusation and declared that she would be confined at Briar Cottage, the isolated dower house on the northern edge of the estate, while the inquiry proceeded. Her correspondence would be inspected, her access to the bank suspended, and anyone attempting to deliver estate documents to her could be detained. Nathaniel had not merely removed his wife, he had placed every ledger, key, letter, and witness under Julian's authority. Eleanor took off the ring holding her estate office keys and set it beside his signature. When Blackthorne falls, she said, remember that I asked you to wait. She left the hall with Mrs. Finch and Thomas before the constables could escort her. At the carriage, Thomas slipped a crumpled notice into her burned hand. He had taken it from Mr. Pike's coat during the struggle at the wharf. The notice listed 24 tenant families and instructed bailiffs to clear their cottages before the next sunset. At the bottom was Julian's new signature as acting estate manager. The stolen grain had been only the beginning. With Eleanor confined and Nathaniel's authority behind him, Julian intended to empty the northern farms, seize the tenants' livestock, and deliver the cleared land to the same London broker within a single day. Eleanor read the eviction notice twice before folding it beneath her cloak. The carriage door remained open, and the constables were only a few steps away. If Sir Edmund discovered the document, he would return it to Julian as part of the official estate records. Eleanor could not allow the only warning to disappear into the same hands controlling every other piece of evidence. "Thomas, listen carefully," she whispered. "You must not come with us." The boy's eyes widened, but His Grace ordered me to remain with Mrs. Finch. That was before Lord Julian gained authority over the household. "Go through the stable passage and find Reverend Cole. Tell him the northern tenants must not sign anything presented by the bailiffs. Do not carry the notice. Do not tell anyone where I am being taken." Thomas looked frightened but nodded. Mrs. Finch stepped between him and the approaching constable, giving the boy time to slip behind the carriage. Eleanor climbed inside without looking back. Briar Cottage stood 5 miles from the manor, beyond a neglected orchard and a stretch of frozen woodland. It had not been used for nearly a decade. Rain had stained the ceilings, several windows were cracked, and only 2 rooms possessed working fireplaces. Sir Edmund left one constable outside the front door and another near the stable. "This is not imprisonment," he told Eleanor, avoiding her gaze. "It is a protective restriction while the accusations are examined. A prison does not become protection because the door has better curtains. Your husband requested that you be treated with dignity. My husband signed away my ability to defend myself." Sir Edmund had no answer. After he departed, Agnes found firewood while Eleanor examined the eviction notice. The document authorized Julian to remove tenants for unpaid rents, yet Eleanor knew that most families named on the list had paid through the end of winter. She had personally recorded those payments. If Julian meant to claim otherwise, he would have to destroy or alter the rent ledger. Then Eleanor remembered the account numbers in the grain broker's letter. The charitable fund for tenant widows was not held entirely in cash. Several families paid their rents by allowing small deductions from relief payments, creating a second record at the Ashford Bank. Julian could alter Blackthorne's ledger, but he could not erase the corresponding bank entries without someone inside the bank assisting him. "The grain and the cottages are part of the same transaction," Eleanor said. Agnes stopped arranging wood in the grate. "What do you mean?" Eleanor spread the eviction list across a table. The 24 farms were not randomly chosen. Together, they formed a continuous strip of land from the northern road to the canal. Whoever controlled them would possess direct access between Bell's Wharf and Blackthorne's largest granary. The London broker did not merely want grain, he wanted a private transport corridor through the estate. Julian had moved the wagons early because he intended to demonstrate that the route could operate before transferring the land. Nathaniel's signature had given him the authority to clear it. If the tenants are removed by tomorrow evening, Julian can claim the farms were already vacant when the land agreement was completed, Eleanor said. "And if they resist?" Agnes asked. "He will call them violent, bring in constables, and use the disorder as proof that stronger management is necessary." Eleanor stared through the cracked window toward the northern hills. She could obey Nathaniel's order and remain inside Briar Cottage. If she left, Julian would argue that her attempt to defend the tenants proved she had organized their resistance. Her own position would worsen, but 24 families would lose their homes before any inquiry began. "We are leaving," she said. Agnes glanced toward the constable outside. How? Briar Cottage had once belonged to Nathaniel's grandmother, who had hated formal entrances and used a narrow garden passage to reach the orchard unseen. Eleanor knew of it because she had ordered repairs to the cottage during her first year at Blackthorne. The passage door remained concealed behind a warped pantry cabinet. They pushed the cabinet aside and found the lock rusted but intact. Eleanor used a fireplace poker to force it open. Within half an hour, she and Agnes were crossing the orchard on foot. They reached the first tenant cottage shortly after noon. Reverend Cole was already there with Thomas. Word had spread quietly, and the families named in the notice had gathered inside the tithe barn. Fear filled the room. Some wanted to barricade the road. Others intended to confront Julian at the manor. "You will do neither," Eleanor told them. "Violence is what he needs." A farmer named Samuel Dyer lifted his rent receipt. "They say these are false. Then we will prove otherwise." Eleanor asked each family to produce its receipts, relief notices, and rent correspondence. She arranged the papers by date and payment method. Soon, a pattern emerged. Every family scheduled for eviction had paid at least one installment through the widow's fund at Ashford Bank. Those bank entries were independent evidence that Julian could not legally dismiss. Eleanor instructed Reverend Cole to place the original documents inside the locked parish chest and record each item in the presence of 3 witnesses. The tenants would carry only copies when the bailiffs arrived. It was a fragile protection, but it prevented Julian from destroying the entire evidence trail with one seizure. Near sunset, hoofbeats sounded outside the barn. Julian arrived with 6 bailiffs and a solicitor. Nathaniel rode behind them. His face changed when he saw Eleanor. "You violated the magistrate's order, and you allowed eviction notices to be issued against families whose rent is paid." Nathaniel turned toward Julian. "You told me these cottages had been abandoned. Most will be before the land is transferred," Julian replied. He said it too quickly. Nathaniel looked toward the crowded barn. "What transfer?" Julian's solicitor stepped forward with a completed deed. Under the authority Nathaniel had signed that morning, the 24 farms had been pledged to the London broker as security for an emergency loan. Nathaniel demanded that the deed be withdrawn, but the solicitor shook his head. The agreement became effective when the broker released the funds at noon, then returned the money. "It has already been used to satisfy a demand against the ducal estate." Nathaniel stared at the document. Julian had not saved Blackthorne from its creditors. He had used Nathaniel's authority to surrender a valuable part of it. The Duke's decision could not be undone by a simple command. The broker now held a legal claim, and the tenant's presence complicated possession, but did not automatically defeat it. Eleanor handed Nathaniel one of the copied bank records. "These families paid their rents. If you permit their removal, you will be confirming Julian's false claim that the farms were vacant. I will stop the bailiffs. Tonight, perhaps. Tomorrow, they will return with the magistrate." A church bell rang in the village. Thomas appeared in the doorway, breathless from running. "Your Grace, a messenger came from Ashford Bank. Someone tried to close the widow's fund and withdraw every pound." Eleanor felt the room contract around her. "Did the bank stop it?" "For now. The manager requires you to appear in person before noon tomorrow, or he will recognize Lord Julian's authority over the account." Julian smiled faintly. He knew Eleanor was under legal restriction. If she went to Ashford, she could be arrested for violating the magistrate's order. If she remained, the bank would surrender the fund, and the final independent record of the tenant's payments could disappear. Nathaniel looked at his wife as though he finally understood the trap his signature had created, but understanding had come too late to restore his authority. Eleanor gathered the eviction papers and faced the families waiting for her decision. Before noon, she would have to cross the county under threat of arrest, reach the bank, and preserve the records before Julian's accomplice erased them forever. Eleanor did not ask Nathaniel for permission. "Reverend Cole, may we use the old parish carriage?" she asked. "It bears no Blackthorne crest, and the bank manager knows your seal." The clergyman nodded. "It will be ready before dawn." Nathaniel stepped closer. "You cannot travel while the magistrate's order remains in force. Then have the order withdrawn. Sir Edmund will require evidence that the accusation against you is false. The evidence is at the bank. That is why Julian needs me prevented from reaching it." Nathaniel looked toward his cousin, but Julian had already mounted his horse. The bailiffs followed him from the barn without attempting the evictions. They no longer needed the cottages emptied that evening. If the widow's fund vanished by noon, the tenants' payment records would become easier to challenge, and the broker could return with a stronger claim. "I will accompany you," Nathaniel said. Eleanor folded the bank message and placed it inside her cloak. No, his surprise might once have hurt her. Now it only showed how deeply he believed his presence should settle every question. "You are still my wife. You remembered that when it allowed you to confine me. You forgot it when your mother removed me from my place, and Julian accused me before your household. Ashford is 12 miles away. Julian may have men watching the road. Then give Reverend Cole enough riders to protect the carriage, but you will not control what happens when we arrive." Nathaniel's voice lowered. "What do you want from me?" "A written statement, admitting that you transferred authority to Julian without examining the estate records, and that the grain moved under an order bearing your signature." His face tightened. Such a statement could damage his reputation with every creditor and noble family in the county. It would establish that Blackthorne's losses were not caused solely by a dishonest wife or disobedient steward. The Duke himself had enabled them. You ask me to condemn myself before the facts are known. I am asking you to state the facts you already know. Behind them, the tenants waited in silence. Nathaniel finally asked Reverend Cole for paper. He wrote the statement, signed it, and pressed his seal into a pool of red wax. Eleanor read every line before accepting it. "This does not purchase forgiveness," she said. "I know." But the pain in his voice told her that until that moment, he had not truly known. They spent the night in the parish house because Briar Cottage was no longer secure. It was the first place Eleanor had occupied since her marriage that did not answer to Nathaniel's title. The room was modest, with whitewashed walls and a narrow bed, but no one could remove her papers or order her to remain silent at its table. Before dawn, the tenants brought their receipts one family at a time. Reverend Cole recorded each document, Mrs. Finch prepared copies, and Thomas marked the names against Eleanor's eviction list. The ordinary object that drew her attention was a bundle of blue-edged payment slips. Each slip had been issued by Ashford Bank whenever money moved through the widow's fund. The blue border contained tiny breaks at regular intervals, identifying the printing plate used for that year. Eleanor placed the grain broker's copied letter beside them. Its lower corner showed the same blue edge. Whoever had forged her instructions had used paper taken from the bank itself. At first light, the parish carriage left for Ashford with Eleanor, Agnes, Reverend Cole, and Thomas inside. Nathaniel rode behind them with 2 men, keeping the distance Eleanor had required. Sir Edmund intercepted them at the county bridge. "Her Grace must return to Briar Cottage," he announced. Eleanor handed him Nathaniel's signed statement, the eviction list, and 1 copied bank slip. "The original records are under threat. If you prevent me from reaching Ashford, your order will help destroy evidence in an inquiry you are responsible for conducting." Sir Edmund read the Duke's admission. Nathaniel waited several yards away and did not interfere. By permitting Eleanor to argue for herself, he surrendered the easiest use of his rank. The magistrate finally moved his horse aside. "You may proceed directly to the bank. I will accompany you and witness whatever is found." They reached Ashford 20 minutes before noon. The bank manager, Mr. Latham, led them into a private office and placed 3 ledgers on the table. The widow's fund remained intact, but someone had submitted a withdrawal order bearing Eleanor's signature and Nathaniel's seal. The seal was genuine. Nathaniel examined it in silence. "Julian had access to my correspondence desk," he said, "and to the sealing box you allowed him to control," Eleanor replied. Mr. Latham opened the fund ledger. Every tenant payment was recorded, proving that the families on Julian's list were not in arrears. More importantly, the attempted withdrawal had been presented by a junior bank clerk named Matthew Crane. Crane was summoned from the accounting room. He arrived, trembling. When Eleanor showed him the blue-edged paper, he admitted that Julian had paid him to remove several unused bank forms and provide information about the widow's account. "I did not write the letters," Crane insisted. "Lady Beatrice brought them already prepared. She said the Duke wished to move the fund quietly." Nathaniel closed his eyes. Beatrice had not merely benefited from Julian's scheme, she had carried the forged instructions herself. Crane produced a receipt signed by Beatrice for the blank forms. Mr. Latham placed it in an envelope, sealed it in the presence of Sir Edmund and Reverend Cole, and recorded every person who had handled it. For the first time, Eleanor possessed physical evidence with an unbroken chain of custody. Sir Edmund withdrew the restriction against her and ordered Crane held for formal questioning. Nathaniel stood beside the cold fireplace while Eleanor organized certified copies of the bank entries. "I thought your charitable account was a social indulgence," he said. "My mother told me it encouraged dependence. It kept 12 widows from entering the workhouse and created a second record of rent payments. You protected Blackthorne in ways I never troubled myself to understand." Eleanor tied the copies with string. "You preferred the results of my work to the discomfort of defending the woman who performed it." He accepted the truth without argument. "What can I do now?" "Return to Blackthorne. Remove Julian from the estate office. Protect every original ledger. And do not question Beatrice until Sir Edmund is present. If you warn her, she will destroy whatever remains." Nathaniel agreed. He left Ashford ahead of them. carrying only his own statement. The sealed receipt remained with Sir Edmund. The original bank ledger remained in Mr. Latham's vault, and Reverend Cole kept a certified copy. Eleanor had separated the evidence so no single theft could erase it. But when their carriage returned to the parish house near dusk, the front door stood open. Inside, chairs had been overturned and papers scattered across the floor. Thomas rushed toward the locked parish chest. Its iron door had been forced apart. The tenants' original receipts were gone. On the table lay a strip of green silk and a message written in Beatrice's hand. "Withdraw your accusation before tomorrow's creditors' hearing, or the receipts will burn with the families who trusted you." Eleanor read Beatrice's message without touching it. The strip of green silk lay across the page, like a signature left by someone certain she had already won. Reverend Cole moved toward the door, but Eleanor stopped him. "No one leaves until Sir Edmund has examined the room. Those families may be in danger," he said. "That is why we must not run blindly toward whichever place Beatrice expects us to search." Agnes checked the windows, while Thomas inspected the damaged parish chest. The iron door had been pried open, yet the lock itself remained unbroken. Whoever entered had not possessed the key, but they had known exactly where the receipts were stored. Only the people inside the tithe barn had seen Reverend Cole place them there. Eleanor studied the scattered papers. Several drawers had been emptied, and ink had been poured across the tenant copies left on the desk. The destruction looked frantic, but nothing else of value had been taken. "They came only for the receipts," she said. Thomas crouched beside the chest. "There is wax on the hinge." Eleanor knelt next to him. A smear of black wax clung to the iron, carrying the impression of a small bird. She recognized the seal used by Mr. Pike, the assistant steward who had moved the grain wagons. Pike had entered the tithe barn with Julian and the bailiffs. He knew where the receipts had been placed. The black wax suggested that he had carried a sealed packet while forcing the chest. It was another clue, but not enough to recover what had been stolen. Sir Edmund arrived and recorded the condition of the room. Before he could organize a search, a second messenger brought worse news. Printed notices had appeared throughout the northern villages, accusing Eleanor of creating false rent receipts, bribing a bank clerk, and inciting tenants against their lawful landlord. The notices announced that the creditors would hold a public hearing at Blackthorne the following morning. Every tenant named in the disputed records had been ordered to attend. "They intend to discredit the families before we can defend them," Reverend Cole said. Eleanor looked at the black wax again. "No, they intend to gather all of them in one place." The threat in Beatrice's message did not necessarily mean their cottages would burn. Blackthorne's old northern granary stood close to the tenants' assembly yard. If everyone entered the building for the hearing, a single locked door and a fire could eliminate the witnesses, while appearing to be another accident. Eleanor sent Thomas with 2 riders to warn the families not to enter any enclosed structure. Sir Edmund dispatched constables to search the granaries, the wagons, and Pike's quarters. They found no receipts. By sunrise, Eleanor had only the certified bank entries and Beatrice's receipt for the blank forms. Those documents proved interference with the widow's fund, but did not establish that the missing tenant receipts had been genuine. Julian could still claim that Eleanor created matching records at the bank as part of a larger fraud. When Eleanor reached Blackthorne, more than 100 people had gathered in the great hall. Creditors stood near the long table. Tenants filled the rear of the room, and members of the county gentry occupied the gallery above. Lady Beatrice sat at Nathaniel's right hand in Eleanor's former place. Julian stood beside the estate ledgers. He had arranged the room to repeat Eleanor's humiliation, but this time he intended to make it permanent. Nathaniel entered without his ducal chain. Murmurs spread through the hall. He walked past the central chair and remained standing beside Eleanor. Beatrice's composure fractured for an instant. "Mr. Harcourt opened the hearing by reading the accusations. Julian then presented the estate rent ledger. Every family on the eviction list appeared in arrears. The so-called receipts have conveniently vanished," he said. "Only Her Grace's private bank records support her claim, and those records were controlled by her." Beatrice rose with practiced sorrow. "I tried to protect this family from scandal. Eleanor used the widow's fund to hide missing rents, then accused me when her scheme was discovered. She placed several letters on the table, all carrying Eleanor's forged signature. She even arranged the grain theft so she could appear to recover it. The gallery erupted in whispers. Eleanor saw doubt spreading across faces that had once trusted her. Without the original receipts, the story Julian offered was simple enough to believe. Then Nathaniel stepped forward. The grain moved because I signed an order without reading its full authority. Julian interrupted. You were deceived by your wife. I was warned by my wife. Nathaniel's voice carried to the farthest corner. I refused to examine the records. I transferred control to Lord Julian because protecting my pride was easier than admitting Eleanor understood my estate better than I did. The admission silenced the room. Nathaniel continued, naming each decision he had made. Surrendering the keys, authorizing Julian to control correspondence, signing the accusation, and confining Eleanor while the tenants faced eviction. Several creditors exchanged troubled glances. A duke admitting negligence before tenants and neighboring families risked his authority, his credit, and any political office he might seek. Yet his confession did not prove Eleanor innocent. Julian understood that. His Grace's regret is touching, he said, but it changes nothing. The documents still show that Eleanor stole from Blackthorne. Mr. Harcourt turned toward her. Can you produce the original receipts? Not yet. The words sent another wave of whispers through the hall. Beatrice smiled. Eleanor looked down at the letters laid before her. Each had been written on blue-edged bank paper, but one corner carried a faint black stain. Not ink, wax. She remembered the smear on the parish chest and the sealed packet Pike must have carried. Beatrice and Julian had made one mistake. They believed the blue border alone identified the paper, but Eleanor knew the tiny breaks in that border changed with each printing plate. The forged letters had supposedly been written 3 weeks earlier. The paper, however, came from a plate introduced only 9 days ago. If she asked Beatrice when she obtained the forms, Beatrice would adjust her story. Eleanor needed to force her to commit to a date before revealing the contradiction. She turned toward Sir Edmund and requested that the doors be closed. I cannot produce the stolen receipts, she said, meeting Beatrice's confident gaze. But Lady Beatrice can tell us when they were stolen, and she will do so without realizing it. Sir Edmund ordered the doors closed and stationed a constable beside each entrance. Eleanor asked Reverend Cole to bring the tenants forward, but to keep the widows and children near the rear doors, away from the crowded centre of the hall. 2 riders remained outside to watch the northern granary. Mr. Latham, the bank manager, placed the certified account entries in front of Mr. Harcourt, while the original ledger stayed locked in Ashford. The sealed receipt, proving that Beatrice had collected the blank bank forms, remained inside Sir Edmund's case. Eleanor had learned from the loss of the parish receipts. This time, no single person possessed every piece of evidence. Before I answer Lady Beatrice's accusations, Eleanor said, I ask that she explain how she discovered my supposed fraud. Beatrice lifted her chin. I noticed irregularities after His Grace asked me to review the household correspondence. When did he make that request? 3 weeks ago, Nathaniel answered, before Eleanor could. I never asked you to examine Eleanor's correspondence. Beatrice's smile tightened. Perhaps Lord Julian conveyed your wishes. Julian stepped forward. I requested her assistance because the Duchess's accounts were in disorder. Eleanor faced him. You claimed you had not examined my desk before the creditors' dinner. I had examined certain household records, not her private papers. Yet you accused me using information taken from my private charitable account, information supplied by the London broker, a broker who purchased land from you. Julian turned toward the assembled creditors. This is precisely how Eleanor has delayed every inquiry. She buries simple facts beneath irrelevant questions. Then let us keep the facts simple, Eleanor replied. She lifted the forged grain contract. This document pledges stores from Calder Farm, whose granary has been unusable for 18 months. Why was it included? Because the list was prepared from information you supplied. Which record? The annual storage inventory. The current inventory does not include Calder. Julian paused. Then an older version must have been copied by mistake. By whom? A clerk. Name him. A murmur travelled through the tenants. Julian had refused the same question on the night of the fire. Now, before a public audience, the absence of a name sounded less like caution and more like concealment. He glanced toward Beatrice. Mr. Pike may have prepared it. Sir Edmund signalled to a constable. Mr. Pike was brought from a side room with his hands bound. He looked exhausted, and soot marked one cuff of his coat. Eleanor did not ask him to confess. A confession extracted under pressure could be denied later. Instead, she placed the wooden tally token from North Mill on the table. Mr. Pike, did you authorize 6 wagons to remove grain? I acted under the Duke's written order. Who gave you that order? Lord Julian. Julian's voice sharpened. You received it from my office. That does not mean I personally instructed you. Pike looked at him, then lowered his head. Eleanor continued. Did you enter the parish house yesterday? No. Did you carry a packet sealed with black wax? His eyes moved involuntarily toward the estate ledgers. Sir Edmund opened Pike's confiscated writing box. Inside lay a stick of black wax and a brass seal, shaped like a bird. The impression matched the smear found on the parish chest. Pike began to protest, but Eleanor raised one hand. The wax proves that an object bearing your seal touched the chest. It does not prove what was inside your packet. She wanted the room to see that she would not exaggerate weak evidence merely because it favored her. Sir Edmund asked. I never saw them. Then how did you know they were receipts? Eleanor asked. Pike looked up too late. She had referred only to a packet and the parish chest. Sir Edmund had asked about tenant receipts, but Pike's denial revealed that he understood which missing documents were under discussion. Julian moved abruptly toward him. Say nothing more. Nathaniel blocked his path. You have directed enough men in this house. Eleanor turned to Beatrice. You stated that I created false receipts to match fraudulent entries in the widow's fund. When did you first see those receipts? At the tithe barn. Yesterday. You were not at the barn. Lord Julian described them. He left before the originals were placed inside the parish chest. Beatrice's composure began to crack. Then one of the tenants must have shown him. Which tenant? I cannot be expected to remember every peasant who approached us. Samuel Dyer stepped forward. None of us approached Lord Julian. We were told to keep the originals inside. Eleanor allowed the silence to settle before lifting the threatening message found in the parish house. This note says the receipts will burn with the families who trusted me. How did you know the original documents were stored together unless someone inside the barn reported it to you? Beatrice laughed, but the sound was brittle. You accuse me because of a strip of green silk anyone could have cut from my gown. No. The silk was meant to make me accuse you too quickly. You expected me to pursue the obvious clue while the forged letters were presented here. Eleanor placed the blue-edged bank forms side by side. You collected blank paper from Ashford Bank. Matthew Crane recorded the transaction and signed a statement before Sir Edmund. You then used those forms to create letters bearing my name. I collected them on the Duke's instructions 3 weeks ago. Beatrice spoke with sudden confidence, relieved to have reached the explanation she had prepared. Mr. Crane will confirm the date. He already has, Eleanor said. Sir Edmund removed Crane's statement from his case. It recorded that Beatrice had collected the blank forms 9 days earlier, not 3 weeks. Beatrice claimed the clerk was lying. Eleanor pointed to the tiny break in the blue border of each forged letter. The bank changed its printing plate 9 days ago. These forms did not exist 3 weeks ago, when you claim I wrote upon them. Mr. Latham approached the table, carrying 2 certified printing samples, one from the old plate and one from the new. Their borders appeared identical from a distance, but under a magnifying lens, the newer form contained a deliberate break beneath the bank's crest. Every forged letter carries the new mark, Eleanor said. If Mr. Latham authenticates when that plate entered service, Lady Beatrice's entire timeline becomes impossible. The bank manager placed his hand upon the register that recorded the printing plate's delivery date. Beatrice stared at it, while Julian slowly backed away from the table. Mr. Latham opened the register, turned it toward Sir Edmund, and prepared to read the dated entry aloud. The new printing plate entered service on the 3rd of November, Mr. Latham announced. 9 days ago. No sheet bearing this mark existed before that date. The silence that followed was absolute. Beatrice looked down at the forged letters, as if the paper itself had betrayed her. Julian moved another step toward the side door, but Nathaniel gave a quiet command, and 2 constables blocked his path. Eleanor placed the alleged grain contract beside the bank forms. Lady Beatrice could imitate my signature because she entered my apartments with the key Lord Julian gave her. She stole 1 sheet of my father's 3 reeds paper and copied language from my older agreements. But she did not know Calder Farm's granary had collapsed. That mistake proves the contract was created from an outdated inventory. Julian forced a contemptuous smile. At worst, it proves someone copied the wrong list. The list came from your office, Eleanor said. Mr. Pike has confirmed that you gave him the Duke's transport order. The canal ticket identifies a broker who recently purchased land from you, and the deed you executed yesterday attempted to give that same broker a corridor connecting Bell's Wharf to the Blackthorne granaries. Mr. Harcourt examined the map Eleanor placed before him. The 24 threatened farms formed an unbroken route between the canal and the estate's northern stores. The scattered pieces finally became one scheme. Julian had accumulated private debts through failed land speculation. To satisfy them, he promised the London broker grain and access through Blackthorne property, but he possessed no authority to move either. Eleanor stood in his way because she knew the tenants, the accounts, and the actual condition of every granary. So Julian and Beatrice had created false shortages, altered the rent ledger, and forged a contract accusing Eleanor of pledging the winter grain. Beatrice intended to replace her socially after Eleanor's disgrace, while Julian gained permanent control of the estate. They had not needed Nathaniel to invent the lies. They needed him to believe them long enough to sign. Nathaniel's transfer of authority opened Eleanor's rooms, surrendered the granary keys, enabled the wagons to move, and allowed Julian to pledge the northern farms. His formal accusation then removed the only person capable of recognizing the fraud. "You could not have done any of it without my seal," Nathaniel said. Julian turned toward him. "You gave it willingly." The cruelty of the answer lay in its truth. Pike collapsed into a chair and admitted that Julian had ordered him to move the grain and steal the tenant receipts. The missing originals were hidden inside an empty flour barrel in the manor kitchen, waiting to be burned after the hearing. Sir Edmund sent constables to recover them. Beatrice denied writing the threat until Agnes identified the unusual hooked shape of the letter R. The same shape appeared in notes Beatrice had sent to household servants. A search of her blue chamber revealed Eleanor's stolen desk key, scraps of 3 reeds paper, and a bottle of the ink used on the forged contract. The fire had been set from Beatrice's chamber by a dismissed footman paid through Julian's private account. Its purpose was to destroy Eleanor's paper samples and copies of the tenant records. Beatrice's signal from the window had warned Pike that the wagons had been discovered. When the original receipts were carried into the hall, each was matched against the parish record and the corresponding Ashford bank entry. The tenants had paid their rents. The eviction claims were false. Sir Edmund ordered Julian, Beatrice, Pike, and the footman detained. Julian would face charges related to fraud, theft, attempted destruction of evidence, and the unlawful removal of estate goods. His private property was frozen pending claims from the tenants and creditors. Beatrice would answer separately for forgery, conspiracy, and arson. Crane's cooperation with the inquiry would be considered, but he would not escape punishment for supplying the bank forms. Mr. Harcourt declared the forged grain contract invalid. The deed pledging the northern farms was suspended because it had been obtained through fraudulent representations and described occupied properties as vacant. The matter would still require formal proceedings, but the broker could no longer remove the tenants or take possession before the evidence was heard. Eleanor's reputation was restored before the same people who had witnessed her humiliation, but she was not finished. She turned toward Nathaniel. "The truth about them does not erase the truth about you. I know." He took the place where she had stood at the beginning of the creditors' dinner, not at the head of the table, but behind the chair farthest from authority. Before the creditors, servants, tenants, and neighboring families, Nathaniel withdrew every accusation against his wife. He admitted that Eleanor had saved Blackthorne through 2 failed harvests, protected the tenants with her private funds, and recovered the stolen grain when his decisions placed it at risk. He surrendered his control over the widow's fund and restored the money Eleanor had contributed from her settlement. He also signed an agreement, placing the northern farms in a trust administered for the tenants, with Eleanor and Reverend Cole as trustees. Julian's vacant private property would be used, where legally permitted, to repair the damaged cottages and cover the costs of the inquiry. Finally, Nathaniel placed Eleanor's estate keys on the table. "I cannot ask you to return to the life I destroyed," he said. "I can only return what I took, and accept whatever future you choose." Eleanor looked at the man she had once loved without caution. His remorse was real, but so was the memory of his signature beneath the accusation. One honest speech could not rebuild trust that his pride had repeatedly broken. "I will not return to your rooms," she said, "and I will not resume this marriage merely because you regret losing it." Pain crossed his face, yet he nodded. Eleanor chose Briar Cottage as her separate residence, but not as a place of confinement. Nathaniel paid for its restoration from his personal income, while she established an independent estate office there. Any future reconciliation would begin only after a year of separate households, public cooperation, and complete financial transparency. He would not court her as a duke reclaiming his wife. If she ever allowed it, he would approach as a man required to earn the right to be heard. Several months later, Eleanor presided over the first meeting of the Northern Tenants Trust. Nathaniel arrived without ceremony and took the chair at the far end of the table. The Dowager Duchess opened her mouth to object when Eleanor began explaining the new grain protections. Nathaniel stopped his mother with one look. "At this table," he said, "the Duchess will never be ordered into silence again." Eleanor met his gaze, then turned toward the farmers waiting for her decision. She did not thank him for granting a freedom that had always belonged to her. Instead, she unlocked the new account ledger with her restored key, placed it at the center of the table, and spoke first.